Question number 2, Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his statement that New Zealand is not a tax haven because, quotes, New Zealand has full disclosure of information, end quotes, given Cone Marshall, a law firm specialising in establishing trusts for foreigners, say, quotes, the identity of the settlor need not be disclosed and the trust deed is not registered with any tax or government authority, end quotes, and, open quotes, there is no obligation to file any trust accounts with any person or institution or to have such accounts audited, end quotes.
And as I call the Right Honourable Prime Minister, my office has been advised this answer may well be longer than normal. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, because there is more than one step in the disclosure process. Initially, a New Zealand resident trustee must submit a foreign trust disclosure form, an IR 607, which simply records the name of the trust and the trustee's contact details. However, the trustee must also keep detailed financial and other records, including the trust deed, details of settlements and distributions, including the recipient's name and address, details of the trust's assets and liabilities, the identity of the settlors and the beneficiaries of the trust, and money that the trust receives and spends. Inland Revenue can get this kind of information and will give it to the tax authorities in any other country if requested under a relevant tax agreement or proactively if that country wishes. I'm advised by Inland Revenue that New Zealand has always been able to comply with these sorts of information requests from treaty partners. This is certainly full disclosure of information. Mr Speaker, the income in these trusts is quite rightly outside our tax base as foreign income earned by foreigners. It is up to other tax authorities around the world to enforce their own tax laws on this income and on their own residents. We can help them do that by providing detailed information to them on request about trusts that are administered from New Zealand. Mr Speaker, I make the second point, which is we automatically disclose that information to Australia. They are one jurisdiction that has asked us. No other jurisdiction has. These disclosure regimes, which by any definition are broad and deep, were the ones passed by the Labor government in 2006.
That's right. Supplementary.
Order.
Blame someone else.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Is he seriously telling the House that the only obligation that a foreign trust is obliged to follow or to make, which is completion of an IR 706 form, and nothing else, constitutes a full disclosure regime for this type of vehicle?
Mr Speaker,
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
For a start, it's a 607 form, not a 706 form. And secondly, Mr Speaker, as I pointed out in the answer, which was very long and very detailed, that is but the starting point, which requires them to keep a hugely detailed information what's in there and report that when required. They were the rules that Labor thought were right when they passed this disclosure in 2006. If the member's now telling us that Labor got it wrong, get on his feet and apologise.
Yeah, supplementary.
Blame someone else, John. You're pathetic.
Order.
Blame someone else.
Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Why has he failed to heed the warnings from the New Zealand Law Commission, the Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand, the OECD and IRD that New Zealand's weak offshore tax laws allow wealthy foreigners to subvert laws and dodge taxes?
The Right Honourable
Mr
Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
I'm prepared to accept that I made one mistake, and that's relying on Labor. They passed the rules.
Supplementary.
Did you vote for them?
Order.
Did you vote for them?
Order. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Can he guarantee no offshore trusts registered in New Zealand are being used to hide illegally obtained assets or dodge tax?
The Right Honourable
Speaker,
Prime Minister.
No Prime Minister could give that assurance any more than Helen Clark could have when this law was passed, no doubt with the support of David Parker in 2006. But Mr Speaker, what is quite clear is New Zealand gives all of that information not only to Australia but any jurisdiction that asks for that, and we've been able to comply with every jurisdiction that's asked. I also note that we have 40 double tax agreements and 11 information sharing agreements, one of which includes Malta.
Supplementary.
Were you warned 3 years
Order.
ago?
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
What effect does he think it has on New Zealand's reputation when we are viewed as a tax haven, harbouring billions of dollars, and his only reaction is to boast that it earns us $24 million a year in lawyers' fees and accountants' fees?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, New Zealand is not a tax haven. Tax havens don't have the disclosure regimes that New Zealand have. But, Mr. Speaker, it's as simple as this. If it's such a bad idea, it was Labor in 1988 who passed the trust legislation. It was Labor in 2006 that had the disclosure.
Order.
And if it was a great idea to close...
Order. The Prime Minister, when I rise to my feet, it requires the Prime Minister to cease his answer.
Point of order.
Point of order, Right Honourable.
Mr. Speaker, for countless answers now, the Prime Minister has departed from doing his job answering the question and attacked another political party for a law that is 10 years old and 7 years after he got the job. Please ask him to act responsibly and answer the questions he's being asked.
Order. 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 The Prime Minister addressed the question almost immediately, and then because he was then responding to interjections which weren't... Order. Because the Prime Minister was then responding to interjections, it's inevitable that some politics will enter into the argument. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
How does he expect to go to international forums and stop multinational corporations dodging their New Zealand tax when he is letting foreign tax dodgers use New Zealand as a tax haven?
That's right.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, the latter part of the question from the member I believe to be wrong. Secondly, in all of the international forums I've been in, the nearly 8 years I've been Prime Minister, no one has ever raised this issue with me. I'm not aware of them ever raising it with a Minister of Revenue. And, Mr. Speaker, as I said, in 2013, New Zealand was given a clean bill of health by the OECD.
Order. Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does he acknowledge that Inland Revenue said in 2013 that, quote, our foreign trust rules continue to attract criticism, including claims that New Zealand is now a tax haven in respect of trusts, end quote?
Mr. Speaker, I haven't seen the
Minister.
particular quotes, but as I said earlier, IRD come up with a whole range of things they want on the work program. I would have thought the most important thing is making sure that New Zealanders actually pay their fair share of tax, and that's been the priority.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Is he disagreeing with Inland Revenue's advice in 2013 that the way forward is to strengthen our disclosure and reporting requirements with New Zealand foreign trusts?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the government is doing is working with the OECD on its base erosion programs. Quite happy to take advice and suggestions from others. And over time, there may be arguments of things we can strengthen. But if you look at what the requirements are under I-607, they are extremely broad and deep.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question. Order. Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So is he opposed to greater transparency for New Zealand foreign trusts when greater transparency will only hurt people using foreign trusts for illegitimate purposes?
The Right Honourable Prime
Mr.
Minister.
Speaker, clearly not, because we have the ultimate in disclosure when it comes to Australia, because we give it full disclosure without even reference to the Australians because they ask it. We'd do it for any other jurisdiction that asked us to do that. If any country wants to come to New Zealand and have the same requirements that Australia has asked us for, we'll provide them with all that information. As I said in my answer, which was quite long to the primary question, New Zealand actually collates a great deal of information and it shares it with every jurisdiction that asks us.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
So would the Prime Minister agree with me that for foreign trusts with nothing to hide, they should have nothing to fear from greater transparency?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, in the end, if a foreign trust is established in New Zealand, it's really important that they do understand that we have a full disclosure regime. It's for them to assess that. We are quite different from the sorts of places that are tax havens where they don't have disclosure regimes.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
A point of order, James Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to introduce a member's bill in my name that would end the secrecy around foreign trusts in New Zealand by imposing a registration and disclosure scheme on foreign trusts to be set down as Members' Order of the Day number 1.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there any objection? There is objection. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
How proud is the Prime Minister of the company he is now keeping when the Panama Papers lump New Zealand in with such auspicious company as Belize, Belize, the Seychelles and Costa Rica in the list of 21 tax havens?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think New Zealand can stand quite proudly on the regime that it runs here in terms of disclosure. I'm sad that the member is running a country mile from what his colleagues around him did, but no wonder they're quiet as little lamb chops.
That answer will not help the order of this House.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
Does he not see that when faced with the biggest tax dodging scandal in history, and when New Zealand is named internationally now as a tax haven, and his only response is to side with the mega-rich tax dodgers rather than cleaning up with the law, that his moral compass is completely broken?
Mr. Speaker, the outrage would be a little bit better if the answer wasn't actually correct, which is, and for the purposes of, I'll read it to the member again because he clearly didn't hear it the first time. Initially, a New Zealand resident trustee must submit a foreign trust disclosure form, an I-607, which simply records the name of the trust and the trustee's contact details. However, the trustee must keep detailed financial and other records, including the trust deed, details of settlements and distributions, including the recipient's name and address, details of the trust's assets and liabilities, the identity of the settlors and beneficiaries of the trust, and money that the trust receives and spends. If that's not full disclosure when it's given in totality to any jurisdiction that asks for it, I don't know what is.
You don't know what is.
Order. Point of order, Andrew Little.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table a document. It's the OECD 2013 report on New Zealand tax compliance that makes criticisms of our foreign tax regime.
Order. Before I put the leave, I just want to check, is it freely available on the OECD website?
Mr. Speaker, I cannot confirm that. It has been supplied to me in hard copy only.
On the basis that it cannot be confirmed, I'll put the leave and the House can decide. Leave is sought to table that particular 2013 OECD report. Is there any objection? There is not. It can be tabled.
Order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table a combined Inland Revenue and Treasury paper entitled Tax Policy Report Taxation of Multinationals, dated the 15th of August 2013, in which IRD say to protect our international reputation, it may be necessary to strengthen our regulatory framework for disclosure and record keeping.
Leave is sought to table that particular Treasury IRD report. Is there any objection?
Yes, you just read it to us.
There is objection. Order. I put the leave. Any member has a right to object. Question number 3.